Well, it is so good to be back with you on a Tuesday, kicking off 2024 on KCMO Talk Radio, 95.7 FM. Welcome in. A big thanks to John Whitmer and Jen Bukowski the last several days, helping hold down the fort and fill in. Of course, John Anthony and Garner doing the great work here back in the studios. But it's always good to be back with you and start off the new year on the right foot. And, man, there's a lot to get to. There was no shortage of news. I mean, in the old days, and I say that like, not that old of a guy, but it feels like even 5-10 years ago, the news cycle kind of slowed down a little bit around the holidays. Now, not anymore. Nope. Now it just keeps on rolling. And that's certainly what we got over the last several days. So you are in good hands with John and Jen. We appreciate them helping out over the Christmas and New Year's break. And for me, I really have come to enjoy, obviously around the holidays, you spend time with family. And that's always great. It's always fun. It's always enjoyable. But getting to spend that time around New Year's, especially when you get the long weekend with New Year's Day falling on a Monday, with the family, and for me, I've got little kids, so, you really get to kind of just sit there as a family, hunker down, and spend basically 24 hours, 7 days a week together. And it's never perfect, of course. I mean, nothing ever is, especially with little kids. But it's a time that I have really come to enjoy and appreciate because I know this too. In a few years, they're going to want no part of me, right? That's how it always goes. So I might as well soak it up while they're young, while they want to be hanging out with dad and mom. And we don't really do anything, but we create a lot of memories just hanging out. And then, of course, whenever we get to New Year's, what do? You pack up the Christmas stuff. You start thinking about 2024, New Year's, new goals, what you want to do differently. I love this time of year. I never really cared for it much. But for me, it's always a chance in the rat race that we find ourselves in to kind of think about what went well, what went wrong the last year, what you can do better, how you can do better at work, how you can do better as a husband, as a father, and all those different things. So I've come to thoroughly enjoy this time of year because it gives me a reason to hit the reset button, which I don't typically do when you're going a mile a minute and you're doing the show and you're trying to be a dad and the whole thing. But I've really enjoyed the slower time around New Year's and all that it brings. And I hope that you had some of that as well. I know that for some people, it's not an enjoyable time of year. It's stressful, and I get that. It is for all of us. But I do hope at some point in the last week or so, you were able to take a step back, appreciate what we all have, living in this great country, in the Kansas City region. There's so much good that is out there. I know we talk a lot about the bad. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of bad. But there is so much good. And there is so much to be grateful for as well. Now, I don't know about you, but ringing in the new year for me now with a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a newborn coming in March, looks like sitting on the couch and figuring, you know what? It's midnight on the East Coast. That's good enough for us. We're going to bed. That's basically what it's become now. And I'm okay with that. I don't like staying up late. It's not really my thing anymore, especially doing this for the last nearly 6 years now. But I'm totally fine with popping on the TV, watching some garbage New Year's Eve coverage, and gosh, it is garbage, and saying, you know what? The ball dropped in Times Square. I'm good. I know it's only 11 o'clock here, but I'll take it. So I'm flipping around, and I didn't see this live. I figure CBS, I'm watching some of what they're doing with some country music guys. Ryan Seacrest doing his thing. Andy Cohen and Anderson Cooper are doing their thing on CNN, which, boy, it had potential, but it was garbage. And then, of course, you got Sunday Night Football. So you had some options, but, I'm sitting there with Kate, so I got to watch something that's kind of New Year's Eve-y. And I missed it live, but I saw it the next morning. Joe Biden does a sit-down with Ryan Seacrest on New Year's Eve. And it was just as painful as you would have expected. I mean, I thought I was running past my bedtime. Joe must have missed the late afternoon nap. I mean, he was struggling to get through this interview with Ryan Seacrest. And I'm not sure exactly what time this was, But for a guy who's been on vacation most of the month of December, despite the fact that we've got a record number of illegal immigrants trying to cross into the southern border, I mean, Joe looked like he was wiped. I mean, Joe's sitting there, his eyes are half open. He looks like he just did a trip halfway across the world and back. He was struggling, John.
Well, they did that there just before 12 noon.
Right. It was pre-recorded.
12 midnight. It was 12 noon.
And he still looked like that. I mean, I'm watching this, and then Ryan Seacrest throws him a softball, right? He says, hey, Mr. President, give me your best memory of 2023. I mean, this is just put it on a tee, knock it out of the park. I mean, it doesn't get softer than this from Ryan Seacrest to the President of the United States. And what's his best memory? Well, all the people who lost their factory jobs.
As you look back and reflect on 2023, what sort of memories, highlights stand out for you?
Well, one of the big highlights stands out for me is my dad used to have an expression. He'd say, Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. So many people through the Midwest and the center of the country, their factories are shipped overseas the last couple of times out, and they were losing hope and faith. So we brought a lot of jobs back to the United States. People are in a position to be able to make a living now, and they've created a lot of jobs, over 14 million. And I guess I just feel good that the American people got up. They've been through a rough time with pandemic, but now we're coming back.
We're back. We've been coming back now. We are. That's why the polls show this guy losing to Donald Trump, of all people, by 5 points in some polls? In some, it's more than that. By the way, in this economy, I know that Joe Biden's dad used to tell him, hey, Joey, job's not about a paycheck. It's about dignity and respect. Hey, Joe, dignity and respect ain't paying the bills in 2024. Still need that paycheck. And thanks to the economic policies of the last 3 years, paycheck ain't going as far. And when you talk about, hey, looking back on 2023, just grateful for all those people who lost their factory jobs because we're bringing them back to the U.S. What does that even mean?
He's a cuckoo bird.
It doesn't make sense. And I'm sitting and I'm watching this yesterday because if I had watched it live, I would have become a meme. I would have broken my TV on New Year's Eve. Would have been one of those guys. I'm watching this yesterday and I'm like, what are we seeing? What are we watching? I mean, I know what we're watching is a goofy clip that I could make fun of for the next 45 minutes till 7 o'clock in the morning. But what are we actually watching? We're watching somebody who is the President of the United States in one of the most crucial times in modern American history, who cannot answer the simplest of questions, being put on a tee by Ryan freaking Seacrest. The thing about history, of course, is when you're living through it, you don't really know it. But we are living through a historic moment. The country's rapidly changing. The world is rapidly changing. Technology, everything around us is moving a mile a minute. And the guy in charge can't move a mile a minute. He can't move a mile an hour. He can't move a mile a day. And that's what sets up a 2024 that obviously is going to be incredibly fascinating, unfortunately for some of the wrong reasons. But coming up, I will give you, as we kick it off here, I'm just going to do this right off the top. I will give you my top 5 national stories to watch in 2024. We will do that coming up next on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. It's good to be back. So my last show of 2023 came on Thursday, December 21st, on the winter solstice. And we had on Ken Coleman, Nick Haynes. I'm thinking about Ken Coleman. I just saw him come up here on my Twitter feed. We had on our buddy Nick Haynes. It doesn't that happen? John, is that a sign I'm starting to get old?
It is, because they don't exactly look alike. Right?
I mean, one guy's got a British accent, for crying out loud.
Right.
So.
Mm-hmm.
We had on Nick Haynes, of course, host on Kansas City PBS's Weekend Review, and he's going to be on today at 9 o'clock, by the way, so don't miss him. We'll talk about the top stories in Kansas City going into the new year. But we talked about whether or not Kansas City was going to break the homicide record. And it turns out the city did. We were both, obviously, as any normal person would, be hoping that Kansas City would not break its homicide record set back in 2020 of 179. And we did, with the numbers I have from KCPD, 182 homicides in 2023. That is a record for killings in this town. So now you have Mayor Lucas, who has overseen the two deadliest years in Kansas City history. And a guy who, when he was running for office the first time around in 2019, sat there and said, I want to get the homicides under 100, which looks like a laughable political promise. Now, back in 2020, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I said, it's his first full year on the job. You've got this pandemic. You have the summer of love. You have all these things that nobody could have predicted. I did not put 2020 on him. That would have been completely unfair because there were so many external factors going on there that no single person could have controlled. But now 2023 comes around, and most major American cities have seen declines in their homicides since 2020. Kansas City just set a record. Now, I'm not sitting here blaming Quinton Lucas. I'm not. It is not one man's fault, one person's fault. It's not the police chief's fault. Even though the Kansas City Star convinced you a couple of years ago that once Rick Smith was gone, homicides would magically go down, it's not his fault. It wasn't his fault. It's not his successor's fault. It's not Quinton Lucas's fault. I mean, if there's one person you want to put the majority of the blame on, it's our horrible Jackson County prosecutor, Jean Peters Baker. But even it's not all her fault. You have a system that is completely broken. You have communities that are completely broken. You have a police department that is way too short-staffed. You have a city council and a media in this community that does not back the blue. You have a prosecutor who does not prosecute criminals as effectively as she should, and an office that does not prosecute criminals as effectively as it should. And yes, you do have laws in the state of Missouri that I know a lot of conservatives don't want to hear it, but you do have laws in the state of Missouri that law enforcement has told me does not help, led by the Second Amendment Preservation Act. Now, that's not the reason. I'm not sitting here saying, yeah, blame the state Republicans and the gun laws. I'm not sitting here saying that's the reason, but it is a factor. Like it or not, it is a factor. Now, does that mean Jeff City should do something about it? Should they repeal the Second Amendment Preservation Act? Well, I would. I mean, I would listen to my law enforcement in my major cities of St. Louis, Springfield, and Kansas City, all who have top 10 homicide rates in the nation, and look for their input, look for their advice on this. I would, but it's never going to happen. You're never going to have in an election year, right? Because we have a Missouri governor's race this year. We're never going to have in an election year anything like this happen. It would be suicide for Republicans. Just ask Eric Greitens. Eric Greitens, former governor, of course, he ran for U.S. Senate in 22. He came out against the Second Amendment Preservation Act. Not even against it. He just raised some concerns about the Second Amendment Preservation Act. And he got hammered for it. I mean, you had guys, his political opponents, who were calling Eric Greitens a rhino. It's laughable to say that, but that's what people are saying. Because what the Second Amendment Preservation Act of Missouri does is it prohibits federal prosecution on federal gun crimes. So when KCPD has a shooter and there's no prosecution for the shooting, they used to be able to file federal gun crimes or offenses against the shooter, at least getting that person off the streets to continue their violent crimes. Well, the Second Amendment Preservation Act makes that illegal and actually prosecutes and fines police officers potentially for working with federal partners. So that is a flaw. And Eric Greitens pointed that out, and he got called out for it in a primary, and that's why nothing's ever going to change. So it's all these things wrapped into one. Meantime, across the state line, how about this? KCK ended 2023 with the lowest number of homicides in more than a decade, whereas Kansas City, Missouri saw more homicides than ever. You've now had, 3 straight years of that number coming down in KCK, and Carl Oakman is the police chief there in KCK. He's been on the show. He's a great guy. He used to be with KCPD on the other side of the state line. His son is still a cop, I believe, for KCPD. And he's moving mountains over there in KCK. And we got to get him back in the studio, by the way. I got to get him back on the show because we had him on, that was probably October-ish, that he came into the studio to talk about the successes for KCK. Meantime, you jump across state line and KCMO's got no idea what it's doing. I mean, nobody. From the city council to the board of police commissioners to the mayor's office to the police chief. I mean, everyone's just throwing their hands up and not having any answers. Prosecutor's office. I mean, everybody deserves some blame here. Some more than others, as I've noted, but every single person involved deserves some blame for this. Of course, led by the criminals. But the criminals are running rampant because, you know what? They don't care. They don't fear anybody in the system. They know the cops are short by hundreds. They know the prosecutor's office doesn't really want to do its job. And they can get their hands on whatever the heck they want. So the other night, when Kansas City was breaking its homicide record, take a listen to this. Woke 41 was interviewing Jake Bikina, KCPD spokesman, live on the scene from a homicide on New Year's Eve. And the interview gets interrupted by gunshots.
Even while addressing the issue, we had to pause for gunshots during last night's interview.
The investigators behind me, I can guarantee you they don't care. Wow. The investigators behind me, they don't care if this is 1 or 180.
That's from Channel 41, KSHB. Literally, the criminals are trolling this community. They're firing off guns within shouting distance of a homicide investigation where multiple media members are present and KCPD is doing an interview. And the criminals are a few blocks over saying, come find us. Come get us. Knowing they won't. That's what this town is living through. I mean, I'm all about rah-rah Chiefs, and we'll talk, of course, to Kendall Gammon coming up at 7 o'clock about the game on Sunday since we didn't have him on yesterday. I'm all about it, but, man, there is a lot of people in this town hiding behind stories like the Chiefs when the things they're actually supposed to be in charge of, like how many people are getting murdered on the streets, they're not doing a damn thing about. 913-408-7957. As we get it rolling in 2024, it is great to be back with you as we kick off a new year. Hope you enjoyed some downtime over the holidays. Welcome in. Happy New Year. 2024 is here. Can't believe it. It's going to be a wild 12-month ride, and I am so glad that we're kicking off the new year on 95.7 FM. Of course, we're couple months into that switch now. Did it back on October 12th. Here we are 2.5, 3 months later, and we are rocking and rolling into a new year and sounding good. But, of course, still on the KCMO Talk Radio app as you get the morning started. Woo! So all is well. Hope you had a great time over Christmas, New Year's, and good to be back in the saddle. Thanks to John Whitmer and Jen Bukowski for helping fill in the last few days here on the show. So Kansas City sets a homicide record in 2023. 182 after 179 was the previous record set in 2020. While most major American cities are trending down, Kansas City is going in the opposite direction. 913-408-7957. 95.7. Let's go to you. Kevin's in Gladstone at 650. What's up there, Kevin? Good morning, my man. Happy New Year.
Could you please tell us exactly what part of the Second Amendment Preservation Act prevents police from enforcing murder charges or referring cases to the federal government?
Well, that's what my friends who have been doing this for a long time tell me is an issue with the Second Amendment Preservation Act with KCMO.
Have you or any of your friends read the Second Amendment Act?
Yeah, it's been a couple of years. It passed, in 2021, right? So it's been a couple of years.
And you read it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that long, right? It's all of probably a page or two, as I recall.
No, it's longer than that. I sent you a copy of it a month or so ago. It does not prevent the police from working with the feds. It doesn't prevent them from referring cases to the feds. But the federal government doesn't have jurisdiction over state murders, except in certain circumstances of hate crimes or something to that effect. And there is nothing in the Second Amendment Act that prevents the police from referring a case to the federal government if there is an equivalent Missouri state law. And there's a minuscule number of federal laws that do not have a state equivalent, and which have nothing to do with the murder rate.
As I recall, Kevin, remind me, because you're obviously it's a passionate topic for you, and I mean that in all sincerity. Remind me, this was passed in 2021, right? Because there was a fear that Joe Biden and the Biden administration was going to overreach when it came to gun laws in this country, correct?
Yes, and that's what it was aimed at.
Yes, and that's what it was aimed at. And that's an understandable goal. But I'm just telling you that there are many in law enforcement who I trust in this town who have told me that it has handcuffed them in some ways working with federal partners, and it may be an unintended consequence, but I'm just sharing with you.
That's nonsense.
It's nonsense.
There's nothing in the act that prevents them from working with the federal prosecutors.
And do you know that because you
I've
do
read
that,
it
you do that
several
for,
times.
but do you do that for a living, or are you just
I'm
saying
an attorney?
You're an attorney?
Yeah.
You are. Okay. That's great. That's good. So have you worked on anything involving the Second Amendment Preservation Act out of curiosity?
No, it's mostly focused on preventing future infringements. It prevents the federal government from using state resources to enforce new restrictions on firearms,
Mm-hmm.
and that hasn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm. Listen, Kevin, I want you to be right, but I just, there's a lot of people that I would consider friends who are not like, woke cops or anything like that, who tell me this has made their job more difficult. So maybe they're...
In what way? How?
I just told you. I just mentioned. They say that when they have a shooter and there's no prosecution for the shooting, they used to be able to file federal gun crimes. And now they can't do that to get these people off the streets.
The statute does not prevent them from doing so. They can fire. If there's a felon in possession of a firearm, they can file that with the feds because there's a state equivalent. If it's a hate crime, they can file that with the feds because there's a state equivalent. There is nothing in the act that prevents them from doing so. Now, they may have been told they can't,
mm-hmm.
but if they would read the statute, they know they've been lied to.
Yeah, I mean these are.
I know it makes the Jackson County prosecutor is her excuse for the problem is the gun laws out of Jeff City, and primarily the Second Amendment Preservation Act, are preventing her from prosecuting criminals. But that's just propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
It is not true.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kevin, I'm going to take your information. I'm going to go back to the people that I knowing KCPD and figure out what the heck's going on. I appreciate your call.
If I sent you another copy of the law, will you read it?
Well, Happy New Year, Kevin. I will read it. I got a lot of emails. I don't know when you sent it or how you sent it, but It was the
last time you editorialized about something you don't seem to know a great deal about.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Have a great New Year. Appreciate it, pal. I've got it right in front of me. I can Google, too. I've got this great thing in 2023 called Google, and I was able to Google the Second Amendment Preservation Act and pull it up here, and, I got it right in front of me. So no need to send that via snail mail, Kevin, unless you want to wish me a Happy New Year. Appreciate it. Steven, go ahead. He's on KCMO. What's up, big guy?
Hey, Happy New Year to you, Doc.
Happy New Year there. Somebody wants to have a friendly back and forth. What's up, my man? How are you, brother?
Well, I've told the community leaders on several cases and venues we've been in. One of the problems is they're trying to solve it from a community standpoint. You can't do it. It's a family issue that fell apart at the family, and you got to go back. You got to go back and address the family, and the rest of it will straighten itself out. Rudolph Giuliani made a statement. He said, if you take care of little crimes, the big crimes will take care of itself. Well, if you take care of the family where it got infected and it fell apart, the rest of it will take care of itself, because the family issues have spilled over to the community. It's spilled over to the school system. And now we got people, they rather hire people like Rosalind Temple and them guys to cook dinner and show up at murder scenes and balloons versus go and deal with when it fell apart at the family.
Yeah. No, listen, thank you, Stephen. Thank you. I appreciate it. Got to run. You're right. All those things matter. That is a core issue. But listen, we're not solving the cultural issues tomorrow, next year. Heck, it's not going to be a decade issue. That issue is going to take generations. And that's not decreasing the murder rate in 2024. You're preaching to the choir, but it's just not changing anything. Kendall Gammon will be here next on KCMO. Well, Bill O'Reilly's fired up in 2024. That was a great O'Reilly morning update. What an outstanding line from Bill O'Reilly talking about the year ahead. He said the harsh realities of today can be blocked with the swipe of a thumb. That is so true. You can ignore the chaos around you by burying yourself into an app. You can do that today. And by the way, millions of Americans do it. We're all guilty of it once in a while, but millions of Americans do it. And that's a standout line there from Bill O'Reilly on a Tuesday. Welcome back. Happy New Year there, John Anthony.
Interesting. I just observed those things. I wonder, what's the farm one? Anybody doing that one anymore?
Farmers only?
Yeah. Well, we move on to different games, right? It's Candy Crush, it's Angry Birds, it's all kinds of stuff, isn't it?
I long for the days of a farmers only commercial on my screen. Yeah. I really do.
I remember
you don't have to be lonely at farmersonly.com. Come on, I know you know the jingle.
No,
come on, Garner, you're a St. Joe guy. I know you know the jingle.
It didn't like he don't hear you.
Oh, that's funny.
No,
anyway.
It was that one where it was on Facebook, and everybody that was your friend was like, hey, bought farmland. I don't know what the heck it was.
Oh, so you're not talking about farmers only?
No, I wasn't. No J-date, nothing like that.
Oh,
no.
Okay.
But anyway.
Well, John and I are still getting back on the same page. We haven't seen each other in a week and a half. So I'm talking about Farmers Only, the dating site for farmers, and John's talking about something else with farming. So go figure. Either way. Happy New Year, John. It's good to see you, buddy.
Likewise. Welcome back.
Oh, man. So that lightness actually leads into this story I was reading yesterday in the Washington Post, headlined, Doom dominates 2024 messaging as Trump and Biden trade dire warnings. And this is why I'm dreading, in some ways, the year to come. Now, I've always promised you, and I was kind of having a moment with myself last night where I was like, this year is going to suck in a lot of ways. Okay. I'm dreading this, John. I really am. Mm-hmm. But we're going to do our best to not always make fun of or goof on serious issues, but try our best over a 4-hour show, 5 days a week, 20 hours a week, to have fun, to keep it light when appropriate, and to not just tell you how the world is going to end in November. I just can't, for my own sanity, I can't do that. And I know for your sanity either. I don't want to do that to you. Like, we've got to be able to realize, yes, there's a lot at stake this year for the future of the country. I'm not denying that. But I'm not going to sit here and do 4 hours of doom and gloom every day. I won't make it to the end of the year, John. I won't make it if I try to do that. And if the bosses tell me to do that, I just might throw my hands up and say, sayonara, I can't do it.
Oh, my go-to phrase then will be, could be worse, Pete. It could be raining. Except on the days when it's raining,
just
and we'll
don't
go
use
to snowing.
Don't use that on the days when it's raining. All right, when it's 52 degrees in mid-May, please don't do that to me. But this is what we're going to get. And here's the thing. Like, if you're Donald Trump, I know that this is kind of his bread and butter. This is what Trump knows, right? In 2015, it worked for him. 2016, it worked for him. The doom and gloom. In 2020, it didn't work as well. In 2024, he's going to go back to what he knows, which is, Joe Biden's a terrible president. You're no longer going to have a country if you don't elect me. And listen, at 77, one thing I've learned, the older people get, the less likely you are to change anything about them. So I'm not sitting here trying to change Donald Trump. I'm just telling you, for a guy that had peace, prosperity, economic freedoms during his first 3.5 years in office, until, of course, COVID, when the whole world changed, I know what I'd be running on if I was him. I'd be running on a message of positivity, on a message of, forget what the media told you about me. Just think about the life that you had, the world that we lived in from January of 17 to March of 2020. I know I'm a guy who sends out dumb tweets once in a while, but strip that out of it. Like, look at what we actually did, the successes that we had. That's what makes Trump very unique compared to Joe Biden. He doesn't have to run against Joe Biden and say, boy, if you reelect Joe Biden, the country and the world is just going to keep getting worse. Most people would have to do that running against an incumbent because they don't have a record to speak of. Or they might have a record, but they got a record in Congress as a senator or a governor or something like that.
Mayor of South Bend.
Yeah, Mayor of South Bend. Please don't bring up that name until at least next week. But Trump's got a real record. The guy was literally president 5 minutes ago. You can run on comparing your track record, especially pre-COVID, because that seems only fair, to what we've lived through the last 3 years. And the choices become very obvious in terms of which was a better 3.5 years for this country and, frankly, for the world at large. When was the world safer? When was the country better off? When was there more economic prosperity? And stop talking about the 401ks. All right, we got a record number of homeless people on the streets in American cities. And you want to brag about the 401k? How many people can't even put money into the 401k because they got to use that money to put food on the table? So it must be nice, but for most of Main Street, when the dollar's not going as far, no one wants to hear about your 401k if you're in the upper echelon. That being said, I'm not expecting Donald Trump to run a campaign on remember how much better things were for you and for this country 3 years ago. I'm not expecting that because that's not who he is. That's not what Trump thrives on. That's not what makes him tick. I mean, look at the primary, right? I mean, he could have easily done that in the primary. Instead, it's been more about, goofing on Ron and calling Ron names and all these other things, when it really should be a very simple proposition. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago when I was there? But I'm not going to expect that. I'm not going to predict that. I'm not, because it's not going to happen. And that's too bad, because to me, it's a pretty easy sales pitch. Coming up on KCMO, we got the news in 2 minutes. We got Dave Traubert, Kansas Policy Institute. What are the headline stories going to be on that side of our state line in 2024? We'll get to that with him. Then a Tuesday edition of The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly right after that on 95.7 FM. 15 minutes until Tirade Tuesday, first edition of 2024. is going to be coming up on KCMO. Happy New Year. It is so good to be back with you as we get what is going to be a wild 12-month ride started. But I don't know about you. 2023 didn't end on a high note. I mean, it did, but it didn't because of how awful these New Year's Eve shows have become. You really had three options on Sunday night. And, we got a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and third's coming in March. So we're not doing anything on New Year's. I like spending time with the family and not doing a whole lot. But, yeah, I don't mind getting into the spirit of the holiday, the New Year, the ball dropping, and watching some of the stuff on TV. But it's just horrible. There was no good option. So let's start with Ryan Seacrest, right? Dick Clark's rocking New Year's Eve with Ryan Seacrest. The best part of the show is that they kept Dick Clark's name in the show. But the show is just horrific. The musical acts, and I don't say this to sound like a millennial getting old, but I don't know the musical acts anymore.
Okay.
And the one guy I knew, John, they put up Flo Rida.
Yeah.
And Flo Rida, I mean, his last hit was 15 years ago.
Well, same like Green Day was on, right?
Yeah.
So basically, it's anybody who doesn't have a gig.
Well,
my friends' bands were all playing. They got gigs, right? Green Day didn't have gigs, so we'll have them on.
I thought to myself, I'm like, boy, ABC's got to start ponying up some real cash. Because when you got Flo Rida doing songs from 2008, yeah. I'm like, we're not dropping the ball to 2009 here. We're dropping the ball to 2024, and I'm looking at Flo Rida like when the iPhone just came out. That's when his song was big.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was in college when that song was hot. And now I'm sitting here, and I'm like, why am I looking at Flo Rida? And here's the other thing that drove me nuts about Ryan Seacrest's show. I mean, outside of Ryan Seacrest looked like he was set to cater, some type of dinner. He looked like he should have had a thing of, fried calamari on his plate as he's holding it up walking through cocktail hour. He looked ridiculous. They were doing the countdown to the Puerto Rican New Year's with the ball dropping, of course, at 10 o'clock our time, 11 o'clock East Coast time, since Puerto Rico is an hour ahead of the East Coast. And I'm sitting here and I'm saying to myself, does anyone care about the ball dropping in Puerto Rico? Like, when have we ever cared about the Puerto Rican? And it's nothing to do with Puerto Rico. It's just, who cares? I know it's an American territory, but who cares? Like, Ryan, why don't you go on at 6 p.m. and start counting it down in London, right? Like, we count it down. We start in New York. Then, you find a central time. Then you, of course, do L.A. That's how it's always done. But now it's only 20 minutes until Puerto Rico rings in the new year. Okay, and why do I care, Ryan? Let's go to a Puerto Rican musician nobody knows to play some song that I don't even know what the person's saying half the time. I don't get it. I don't understand the appeal and what they were going for with the Puerto Rican New Year.
It's so much easier to do now than it used to be, but they've gone in the wrong direction. Let's switch to the central time zone. So we're sitting there watching, and the countdown's down here in the thing. We're in the middle of some goofy song, right? They're not even going to acknowledge
They're not going to
acknowledge the TV in real time.
Oh, so you stayed up till midnight?
I was there.
Wow, good for you.
Yeah.
The East Coast.
I was asleep at 9 to 9:30, though, while the Packers were playing a little bit in and out. But I had a nap.
So you got a nap in.
No, but they used to stagger it, and they'd just show you an hour later, and it would look like it was live at midnight Central Time. It had already been an hour earlier, but now they got to show you when New Zealand rings it in, and we start through the international time zone. It's like, dude, I'm having breakfast. I don't care about Auckland.
No, I really don't care. I'm with you there. I didn't even make it till midnight our time. I figured the East Coast ball drop was good enough for me, 11 o'clock. That's plenty.
And then the other thing is somehow New Orleans is the central time zone city. Like, please, could we just go to Chicago or something?
Yeah.
Or are they Eastern?
No. They're central.
Like us,
they're central, yeah.
I would have gone to Minneapolis someplace a little more chic.
Nashville? I don't know. Something.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Around.
New Orleans, huh?
Get a chance to have it here in Kansas City, Union Station, maybe once every 10 years, something.
Yeah.
Right?
That'd be cool.
Right, and now with technology, you can do this. And we used to handle it better in the old days when you had to stagger it and delay it an hour.
Yes. So now I want to get to the other networks. Let's go to CNN. And CNN with Anderson Cooper and Andy Cohen. Now, leave the politics out of it, okay? I know Anderson Cooper's a hack. I know CNN stinks. The show has some potential because they're drunk. Like, there's something about two gay guys who are friends doing a New Year's Eve show drunk that's actually got potential to it. Because, once again, leaving the politics out of it, they have good camaraderie. They've got a good vibe. They can be funny. It can be entertaining. They're doing shots on the air. Like, that's the kind of stuff like I would actually enjoy watching. And there were moments when it was okay. But then there were other moments where I'm watching Anderson Cooper and Andy Cohen interview John Mayer in Tokyo as he sits there with kittens. And John Mayer looks stoned out of his mind. They're drunk. And this segment's going on for 8 or 9 minutes where John Mayer's talking about cats. Now, it would have been good if it was like 90 seconds to 2 minutes. Hey, let's go to Tokyo. John Mayer's eating breakfast with his kittens at some diner. That would have been funny. But it went on for like 8 minutes. I'm like, this can't continue, guys. This cannot continue. This is too long. So there are moments of brilliance on CNN, which I never thought I'd say, but there were moments where it was actually wildly entertaining. But then the rest of it was the interviews were just way too long, and I do wonder if it's partially because they were drunk. So, you know, sometimes when you're drunk and you do something for 10 minutes, you talk to somebody for 10 minutes, but you thought it was like 2 minutes. Like, that's where the producers who theoretically are sober, I don't know what to say about that, but the producers who are theoretically sober have to get in their ears and say, guys, rap, let's go. Wrap it up. Keep it moving here. But they didn't do that. So CNN had potential. The upside was there, but they didn't come close to meeting it. And then last but not least was CBS. CBS did its show from Nashville. And they were going for kind of the country music theme, and they had Morgan Wallen and Blake Shelton and Thomas Rhett and some of these guys. But, I mean, Morgan Wallen's good, but some of these guys just over the hill, stunk. Cody Johnson's good, but a lot of these guys were not any good. And then here's the kicker. CBS, going into the new year, they did the New Year countdown in New York. You know, they were in Nashville, but for the New Year at 11 o'clock our time, midnight East Coast time, they go to New York, right? And they go to New York, and what's the first thing? Right as the ball hits the bottom, right as the New Year comes in, they show two people kissing, and it happens to be two guys. And I don't care. Like, love who you want to love. It's not my business. But when you're going for, like, the country music theme and traditional America and Americana, like, that was your theme of the night, and it was almost like it was perfectly planned. Like, right as the clock hit zero, right as you hit midnight, it's like, boom, let's cut right to it and find some people kissing. Oh, okay, here we go. I'm not offended by it, but I'm just like, what are you going for here? Are you going for like the Nashville country music Americana theme, or are you going for something else? Because you kind of clashed a lot of cultural opinions on that one, CBS. So way to go. With the over-the-hill, washed-up country music guys outside of a couple of them, and that, it was kind of like, no one gets an A from me on New Year's Eve. No one. No one gets a B, frankly. All right. I got my tirades out of the way. Now it's you. 913-408-7957. Tirade Tuesday. Let's do it with you next.